We will speak about a narrow application of this topic inside of this broad topic. We will speak about the cross-industry innovation change. Together with me, we have experts taking part in discussion. We have Vasily Rudakov, the Deputy Director General of Magnezit, Andrei Malutin, the first Deputy General of RT Inform, Rostech Corporation, Konstantin Parshin, Vice President and Executive Director of IT Cluster of Skolkovo Fund, Pyotr Smolentsov, Commercial Director of KUKA, Russia, and Viktor Taratuhin, Director in Silicon Valley and SAP and Technological Universities. I would like everyone to speak about your companies, every 1 minute each. We'll just go one by one. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. My name is Pyotr Smolentsov. I'm Commercial Director for KUKA, Russia. Our company is involved in automation at low level. This is related to robotics. We are involved in the work with the product. We are the client of SAP technology, and we're their hands. So we will tell you how we work together with them and how we implement our robotized solutions, automated lines, how this is being operated and controlled. And we will speak about the challenges related to digital twins, etc. And I will be responsible for cyber systems in this discussion. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I am Vasily Verzakov. I am Deputy Director General for Magnezit Group. Today, we would like to discuss the innovation processes and automation and how we can interact them with the production, how we can obtain the online information and control and regulate production processes, cost, and how we can detect the excess cost that we see in production. And here I would like to mention that we should divide this issue into two tasks that we see for ourselves. First of all, we see the issue related to intellectual property and trust between the counterparts, the customer and work executor, the contractor. And also we need to discuss the idea of creation of the uniform regulatory database that would provide an understanding on where we will move forward, what we shall take as a ground, what type of quality of material we will use, and which would be the parameters, and what we would receive as a result, and what will be provided by the existing production lines. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. My name is Alexey Mitenkov. I'm working as a Deputy Director General for the TMK Piping, a metallurgical company. We are producing pipes, and I have prepared a few slides for your attention. I would like to show you the next slide, please. Speaking of what is the TMK today, this is 3.8 million tons of piping. We have 28 production facilities. We have servicing companies that provide services for oil and gas companies at those wells where our pipes are being used. As for other piping, those are steel and seamless pipes. As for our capacity, we have 3 large-scale smelters in Russia. We have seamless producing facilities and welded pipes producing facilities, cutting facilities, and 3 research and development centers. Next slide, please. And here you see a small picture. It's like a cartoon, and this is where our pipes are being used. You see different types of usage of our products, different types of our customers. At the lowest level, we have utilities, then oil and gas sector. We have also pipelines. Thank you. Konstantin Parshin, Vice President of Skolkovo Fund, Director of IT Cluster. Just a couple of slides for your attention as well. Perhaps everyone has already heard about Skolkovo. Just some new information at the moment. Skolkovo ecosystem is the most developed information ecosystem in Russia. We have more than 2,000 startups that generate revenue, substantial revenue. It's about 50 billion rubles. And we see a lot of investment deals. You see it here. You see the figures on the screen. And speaking of our ecosystems, we see more industrial partners incorporated in this ecosystem. We have 92 industrial partners who develop their innovative activities at the territory of our center. The most important thing is that as for Skolkovo, the main ideology of the project, we have one-stop shop. We have all of the services necessary for any startup provided, whether directly or via the network of accredited partners. This is related to direct financial support, marketing support, via collective use centers, then intellectual property protection. I'm not going to speak about the details. Everything is available on Skolkovo homepage. And I'm not going to speak about conclusions, but the fact remains we are ready to assist startups, we are ready to assist projects, and we ensure and we improve their chances to be implemented. And it will be, as a result, implemented as a successful feasibility stage or also full-scale industrial implementation. And here we interact with representatives of all investment institutions. We have a portfolio of customers, partners from different venture and private investment funds. And such combination, availability of a startup, customer, who needs this technology, investor who is ready to invest, and Skolkovo, which is ready to assist to bring this technology to the end and to provide the required level of expertise. We consider this technology is the most productive, and this results in reduction of a production cycle and innovation cycle. So we want to accelerate the innovation cycle. Good afternoon. I'm Andrei Malutin. I'm Deputy Director General for Rostech. We are the internal IT integrator for the group of companies of Rostech. Good afternoon, dear colleagues, friends. My name is Viktor Taratuhin. I'm Regional Director for SAP in academic program NextGen in Silicon Valley and in the west of the United States. For quite a long period of time, I've been teaching in the United States, in Germany, in Russia, in respect to topics related to innovation and industry. Thank you very much, dear colleagues. As you've noticed, we have a cross-industrial team. Here at the stage, the manufacturers, idea generators, educational programs. And if we study in details the topic we're discussing, if we just discuss the entire term, cross-industry innovation change, we're not going to speak about innovations separately from technologies. As for cross-industrial things, we're all in the same ecosystem, vendors, suppliers, partners, those cross-industrial processes that are outside the scope. Will be related to the production lines. And when we discussed with our colleagues what we've been discussing, we realized that we are missing those chains. We're missing those links that would be the interaction, that would be the interconnection. And this is what is related to stabilities. Companies speak different languages. We see a very low level of trust, etc. And thus we see different barriers related to additional checks, reduction of efficiency both for companies and economy as a whole. Vasily, here comes the first question. How can we ensure better understanding between the companies? How can we start building up the uniform space for the companies to work in unison? Well, Sergey, I think the most important thing is that we should have trust and creation of a digital platform for data exchange. What ensures the growth in economy? It's ensured by 100 loading of capacities available. And speaking of, so we in terms of implementation of projects, it's from 5 to 10 years. And we need to obtain more continuous portfolios. We need to obtain the understanding of how everything is going to build up, how the customer will understand how to reduce the cost and improve the operating features. Maybe it would be toward model based or etc. I understand that different opportunities related to Torah and understanding in terms of building up the relationships will be based on a uniform reference or language for communication between the companies. This mechanism will work in the case if large companies or holdings will be the part of this history and others will join. They will determine the requirements in terms of reference information. Yes, of course. Today, each holding raises its certain tasks, and if it's tied together in terms of inter-industrial cooperation, and if we see the data exchange in all directions of industry, I think that this process will be really very effective. Then it would be a question to you, Andrei, as a representative of one of the largest machinery holdings in the country. Being the integrator for a group that incorporates different industries, would you be such an example? What are you doing for this? Will you create the standards in this respect? Well, in reality, we are in the process of creation from the beginning of this year. And probably we are the largest industrial group present in Russia. In our group, we have more than 800 companies in different branches of industry. And here we need to deal with the standardization and uniformity of requirements, because it's very difficult to separate us into a separate branch of industry like TMK, like piping company. And that is why we started to approach two directions. We started to standardize the uniform configurations of our IT equipment and software, which is a complex process. We started with the so-called ARMS, with automated working stations. Then the next stage would be related to server equipment and then software. And then another direction, large-scale direction that we have is centralization of regulatory reference documentation available in the company. And so we are working on a selective basis. So first of all, we have a reference book of all the counterparts, and we have a catalog of products produced by all of our companies. It would be the uniform catalog, and it will be an integrated reference book of materials and equipment that is mainly consumed by our company. This is a large-scale work, and in this work we will have to take into account the interests of each of 800 companies in order not to skip anything and to create a kind of a uniform, standardized accounting space. First of all, for our IT sphere, it's very important. But speaking of regulatory documentation, this is related to a broader task, and it will be consumed by different users. And we will use the uniform approach, uniform platform approach to different information. We will be able to build up those things that we have started to discuss at the very beginning. We will be able to tie them together with the production processes, with cooperation between the suppliers and contractors, etc. Well, okay. Understood. We build up, we build up a ground, a platform at which we will be able to compare and find something in common. It will be the foundation for any integration, for any further activity. Because for every company, whether they're within the group or not, if everything is different, if they have different reference information, different approaches, different type of production lines, they will never find things in common. That is why first step would be to create or find something common. This is what we are doing. This is more or less clear. And what I haven't heard from what we have said, we can speak the same language, but speaking of the level of trust, this is what Vasily has mentioned, it's not ensured by anything. We know that technologically there are different stories related to blockchain, smart contracts, etc. But if people speak the same language but don't trust each other, things will never work. I would like to draw your attention to the fact that we have been discussing, and I would like to start the discussion with the fact that standardization is the essence and the foundation for further integration and trust. Because integration through standardization and trust will be the third step in this chain. And if we're speaking about blockchain, blockchain appears not from it's based, once we're speaking of blockchain, speaking of sales chain, we would say that it's based on standard documents, etc. We cannot follow this path without standardization of things. Then, Konstantin, here comes a question to you. In spite of the fact that blockchain is a topic which is relatively new, you had the blockchain VIP week of distributed ledgers, and what should be done for making these technologies well received in the companies? I will apologize, but so it happened that I have professional deformation. When I hear blockchain or AI, I have allergic response. because when it became as a hype, we have an entire flood of projects, and each of the projects starts with blockchain project. Ideally, if it's an AI in blockchain, then it would be the peak. Just the wording is interesting. That is why we spend a lot of efforts to separate between things that we need and those we don't need. And we are all under hype effect when we see a new technology and we consider this is a savior for humanity, or cancer treatment, cancer medicine, or solution of the hunger problem. And I agree with Andrei. Just come and visit us. We can speak a lot about Skolkovo, but this is SAP session. That is why I'm very concerned about the accuracy of information. So if we speak about it, we need to understand the essence of the business, the essence of relationship, and the essence of business transformation. And those technologies that support it will always be available. As for blockchain, if we get rid of that hype that was speculated by different financial deals, and if we just look at blockchain as one technology that is capable of increasing the level of trust in distributed system, then it will enable us, and maybe the current systems that are being offered and traditional systems that are offered for establishment of interaction between the participants, they provide a sufficient level of protection of the system, but it's always good for the participants of the ecosystem. But what we see, and hence I would support the previous speaker, that first of all, if we speak about implementation of such mechanisms, then we see that they are faster implemented at B2C market. This is where the nature of relationship is transformed from the legal relationships and financial relationships to simple approaches and simple deals. It could be the mortgage deals. So I've read the information that we have about 500 blockchain deals in Leningrad region, or etc. And so the descriptive component in standardization of these relationships has to be done first before the automation is used. Then we can proceed with the smart contracts, for example. As for B2B relationships, this is rather variable, but there is another moment associated with it. It's related to innovative ecosystems. From the point of view of standardization, one of the most successful markets today is the procurement market. A lot of efforts has been implemented. I see Ilya Dimitruk, who is one of the market leaders in terms of procurement automation processes in this country. A lot of efforts has been spent by colleagues from Rostech. A lot of laws have been adopted. Speaking of innovation chains, it's still a kind of a field for experiments. And honestly speaking, I haven't seen a successful one. And the problem here is not related to standardization, though standardization is really very important. And standardization in respect to innovations is possible. And we see good examples and best practices in the other countries. But there is a kind of a culturological problem. Customers have to be prepared for disclosing the information, not as a procurement plan, but just disclosing the plan of strategic development, disclose the information related to promising technologies. And I think today this is one of those dilemmas that exist. Maybe it's not still understood because there is stiff regulation in terms of information security. And this dilemma is of something unknown, because usually startups are ready to invest and develop new technologies. but they do not orient themselves in those inquiries that they can generate from industry or from a customer representing a real branch of industry. And I think a real remedy here would be intensive interaction or communication and support of all possible platforms that or grounds that are being provided, whether NTI or Skolkovo free. Maybe our market is far from being saturated, but I think in a while that we will approach to a standardized system, not certification, but standardization system, where we'll be able to perform the search or the entire exchange of technologies, and we will be able to disclose the information and use blockchain as one of possible mechanisms. I think this is kind of moderate optimism. We do not see any enhancement of activities in terms of cross-industrial activities or kind of lift for innovative companies. We see that this opportunity exists, and this session approves that such situation has changed in the recent 2 or 3 years. But we are still we still have not approached the platforms, and we still need to cover a certain path.
Yes, I say that, and again, we're coming back to the question about standardization. And we talk about innovations, but innovations in somewhere we're trying to standardize at least the language we speak, so that we can actually speak the same language. But the environment of trust, I like this word, by the way. The environment of trust is like a foundation for technologies, technological methods like track and trace methodology, for example. Alexei, question to you. If TMK becomes a user of this united environment of trust with accepted standards of communication, if there are mechanisms which allow this track and trace, and so that the client is able to see the entire history of the product he receives, what benefits would that give to the customer if a customer starts using track and trace technology? Well, that's a hell of a question, I should say. First of all, I've listened to what the colleagues have said, and here I'm thinking this environment of trust and united environment, but we will never have united catalogs or certification system, because it doesn't exist anywhere in the world. The only principle that exists is the platitude of multitude. There are analogs that created, and then they're simply multiplied. Now, coming back to unity and variety, really the question about track and trace is important on the one hand, but on the other hand, there should be economic efficiency. You can track and trace that. If you have money, you can gather the data, but the question is the cost of that all. Yes, there is track and trace system. Yes, the demands are growing from our customers. They want what, when, what grade of steel, what shift, what seam. The demands will be growing, but the question is about efficiency, whether it's expedient economically, and how this data should be stored, and the united environment. I don't quite understand, what is it? You mean everyone will have his own environment? Well, I mean an environment specific to a production chain. So it is not about one country, for example. Well, again, there's a track and trace demand from the customer, but how do I fulfill that demand? Manually or using automation means? That's a question of economy. If I have people who might pay $50. That's one thing. In the United States, they pay $3,000. That's another story. You can make 50 people work manually, or you can use an expensive automation tool. Let me clarify the question. I think what Sergey is asking, there's TMK, company that manufactures pipe, and that company has clients. Will it be important, or will there be changes to your business, or is it important for your consumers to be able to track and trace the entire production chain of their order from the moment the order is placed to how it's manufactured and to the end product stage, and then how it's shipped and all the logistical stages? Do I get your question right, Sergey? Well, yes. Will it give an effect, or is it not necessary? Because your customer might say it doesn't matter how you produce it. What matters for me is that I receive the pipes by this date and that they can work for 5 years problem-free. I think in a large series, medium series sectors, we're not talking about custom products. We're talking about due dates of delivery. And how I do it, it's not that important for a customer. If I can deliver on a specific date and with proper quality, so what's the difference when I started shipping? If I delivered on time, then that's enough. In discrete production, if we're talking about aircraft or tanks, that might play a bigger role. Very well. Alexei has touched upon an issue which leads us to the question, well, Victor, it's to you. You're in educational programs, especially in aerospace industry. In your view, are people ready for such technologies? And there's even a bigger question, will these technologies help in coping with the problems of a human factor? Yes, I wanted to shift the focus of our discussion since we started talking about trust. I think speaking about the chain of innovations, we voluntary or involuntary, and that's not just a problem of Russia, but we exclude the universities out of this system. Universities live their own life, companies live their own life, they create corporate universities, and they believe it's enough for them to function properly. However, technologies without a model of interaction between universities and industry, again, not a hype-type approach, but a system where industry and university are in contact. It is really very important. It increases trust. And without going into too many details, without going into aircraft, I would like to give a specific example. Yesterday we signed a memorandum on understanding between TMK, the Ural Federal University, about the opening of the laboratory together with the SAP company, a laboratory Next Gen Lab. And this laboratory is that playground of trust where university and industry are talking, and they do it not as part of theoretical courses, but they perform specific projects. This is the same what we do with Stanford University, and this is what we do with other leading universities in the world. So I think this model, when we start trusting each other more, when we believe, and now if you look at Stanford campus, it has much more 3D printers there than in university classes. So we create this atmosphere of cross innovations. The question here is, will these innovations be needed for the industry? Will innovation in industry be able to comprehend and accept those new ideas which will be generated as a result of that cooperation. This is my comment. Well, great. Andrei, then coming back to you as an industrialist, as a representative of industrial companies. My industrial company is ready, or what needs to be done to get ready for those technologies? There's now this huge trend. The state is turning the machine building, and there was a meeting presided by the Minister of Industry, and the companies reported about the results of what they did to increase export from Russia to external markets. Well, it's clear no one's waiting us there with the outstretched arms to embrace us. It's been mentioned that the markets have been divided already, and the demands to the products produced by companies are quite high. So what do you think? Do technologies help reach out to those foreign markets? And if we're talking about the story about track and trace, what needs to be done next in order to improve the attractiveness by using expert technologies? Yes, I'm trying to go back to earth, so to say, in our discussion, and not to lose focus. When we talk about track and trace, well, how I see it is building a production chain from a manufacturer of a semi-finished product to a consumer. And the question of selling it to end user, whether it's inside the country or abroad, it's a different question. Different technologies can be meant here. I mean, not the technologies which help build this chain, but the technologies which add attractiveness to the product, which make it more competitive. And talking about Rostech companies, many of them, and probably the majority, are unique in terms of products they manufacture, and they are unique because they have a high share of modern technologies in them, which generate specific consumer properties and quality. So within Rostech, there are a lot of high-tech companies which create these technologies for others. So inside of us, like I said, what we need is a chain of those documents. What we need is traceability. And by the way, we have a group, like innovation cluster. There's a technological cluster, and it produces a number of specialized and technological equipment and solutions, software solutions, and what is needed is a complete connection between them. The ability to track and trace, trust, everything we've mentioned here. And speaking about external market, once this chain is functional, the uniqueness of our product will only increase, and it will be even more attractive, both internally and externally. And already today, a lot of products of ours goes for export, and you've been in partnership with Schwabe, that produces optic devices, and its products are widely exported. So that's my response. Very well, thank you, Piotr. And I wanted to come back to you with this question. So there is a certain standard space, like a trusted environment, and we're trying to apply this term to what exists, but I'm trying to look into the future, because we are talking about where we're going to and how fast. So this unified space environment, which includes the data, the traceability, the digital twin, etc. The question, Piotr, to you is, if you were to create this environment together with your counterparties, what would your customers gain from a digital twin of machine tools or robots that you manufacture? I'll answer this question in a minute, and I would like to elaborate on the previous question about engineers and education. It is true that when we introduce robots or new systems, we're faced with one big problem in Russia and CIS countries and Eastern Europe. The key problem is lack of process engineers. And at Team K, well, they want ready-made solutions. Maybe it's an outdated standard, but what is needed, the companies which manufacture end product, they should work in close cooperation with universities, so that universities train the specialists needed to those companies to manufacture the end product. In my case, these automatic lines in some production cells, which make it possible for Time K to manufacture pipes or whatever other end product, if it's a different factory. This is only starting, and our integrators, foreign integrators, they've realized it long ago. And now there are departments in the universities which train specialists for mobile robotic equipment. For example, in Danone or Parmalat, when we install a milk line, well, which simply, our problem is that we don't have a specialist who can install it and set it up. So we sell this line together with a specialist, because the factory doesn't just need a IT guy, but a process engineer. Speaking about a digital twin, we cannot work without a digital model. There is a digital model and digital twin. Our production model needs to be manufactured, and for us to show that the line does what is expected to do, we need to build a digital model. The integrators now are using digital twins. This is very convenient and a very economical tool. So these programs, these simulation systems are available to all present-day producers, soft developers, and they allow you to do two things: before production and during. Before the manufacturing, if you create a digital twin of a factory, and by implementing those virtual robots with all the physical laws of movement, we can design a factory without actually building it and see all the risks if we built it this way or another way, and you can analyze a lot of options, and that saves a lot of resources, engineering resources. It saves a lot of assembly time, final assembly, and it gives you a perfect solution. So we take into account the laws of physics and other elements, and having the information, knowing how it works, and getting the information from the virtual equipment, Based on the experience, we kind of have a clear idea about how this factory gonna operate and whether it corresponds to customers' needs, or whether we're not going to be able to fit within the space available. During work, as we gather the data, the customer saves on maintenance because we know what robot, what machine tools can work longer and which works shorter. We know the characteristics of all reduction gears, and we know when a reduction gear is gonna fail. So we don't need to maintain 100 robots on KAMAZ. We need to maintain only 4, for example. Others, if they do not work with full workload, we can save on service or engineers. A digital factory or a copy which our colleagues produce because we only provide data for it to work. So one of the elements is that it helps to reduce the inventory. For example, if a customer wants to manufacture a product, but he doesn't know whether a particular equipment is fine for that or not, and we can analyze that in a virtual world to see whether we'll be able to produce it or not. And that's a great advantage because we do not touch the conveyor. It continues working, and we simply use simulation to understand what should be added. And there are drawbacks. There are hidden obstacles. There are sophisticated technological processes like welding, and there are about 40, 50 external factors influencing the weld seam, and you cannot take them into account. I have not seen, at least, a software which would be able to take all those into account. And one might get carried away, and in this case you won't get good results with welding, although the virtual model gave good results. But in the virtual model of welding, for example, we didn't take into account that if the temperature drops 20 degrees, the physical dimensions of the robot decrease 1 millimeter, and all the trajectories shift. And during welding, it expands. So these are the moments, the problems we were faced with. So our digital twin is economically efficient for the company. And I've heard a different opinion, and I hear it often, is that when there's a company and our machines are delivered to it, and it is connected to a digital twin which you use to determine how worn certain parts are, and if it's also you who maintains that equipment, then very often it so happens that for the company the maintenance using digital twin becomes more expensive rather than standard way. For example, if a ball bearing breaks or a mechanism breaks, well, they're there to replace it. But here, if you use the digital twin, then you need to inspect it like 5 times before replacing it. And well, as a result, I mean, I've heard very often. Can you comment?
So I understand your question. Probably here we need to speak about how we trace the robot or a machine. We have native and foreign developments in this field. We put different sensors on a robot. Maybe I will clarify my question. If we're speaking about the foreign origin, it's not related to a robot in particular, maybe to any type of Western manufacturers. They give us an opportunity to use the digital twin, but the majority of Russian customers, they do not procure this function because they consider it's inappropriate, so it's not in demand by many customers. You know, the majority of equipment that is being imported to Russia does not have this digital twin. It's not just purchased. There is a problem related to the fact that the digital twin is not purchased. But if we deal with the design of production, we do not use any other tool, because it won't be possible to prove the efficiency of this tool by not using it. If we understand how the production line is supposed to operate, we will not be able to cope with this problem without a digital twin. We do have different machines, and there are systems that allow us putting different sensors on robots, and even by sound we are capable of determining that a reducer is not functioning properly. If it's not functioning properly, it will be more expensive for a company to substitute it if it fails. But it's better to predict. It's better to predict the failure of a reducer and to do it as a planned maintenance work. But if it fails, it's always a shutdown of the equipment. It's a problem. It's a failure. And it's always the case when the company spends more money. Well, but it's not always like this. Well, I think the words that you have said are absolutely correct. You're absolutely right that we do not have experts in this field. And if we ask the question, will these occupations, will these skills be in demand in 5 years? Why I'm asking this question? The case is that if the company strategically invests in the modern projects, the company will face a problem. The problem related to education, because education nowadays is at such a level when it will not be possible to provide the sophisticated technologies that the industrial companies are using. And we would like the experts in education to have an understanding the type of demand and the type of requirements in process engineers or in engineers. We do not have such a background as mechatronic, but we will need it in a way. Just in order for us to move forward, the question comes, Vasily, what prevents you, or once you are the participant of this cooperative chain, will you add somebody else's digital twin with your own data and then provide it to a client? Well, the question was absolutely correct about the standard, and the issue of intellectual property is also very important nowadays, because we have solutions, we have the information, and it's available for use. Many companies, they order the variety of products for the project. But the technologies nowadays are short-cycle technologies, and these technologies are permanently being improved. And thus we see that the project gets obsolete, and we get new materials, sophisticated approaches, solutions, and the owner of the project may not even guess of any changes that are occurring around. Well, okay. The idea of a digital twin is understood, but the function that it is associated with is the search of new business models. And thus we transit from the sales of products to the sales of results of activities, like having a company that manufactures compressors. They sell the volumes of compressed air that they generate. And then how the work with the client will change if you sell robots and machines as services. By the way, here at the exhibition, we have such an example. It's not the advert, it's not marketing. There is company Abaji, and I think this is an example of an idea of And this is the idea that everyone is approaching. We see integrators, including foreign integrators, who are searching for tasks, and they do not sell the complex of work, and they just sell one product. They rent spaces, they install production line, and it's the system applied by Bosch in Prom. They work with machines. This is a kind of internal outsourcing. And this production line belongs to an integrator, and all of the employees are engaged. They work with an integrator, but at the territory of the production facility. And for one product produced by this product line, the plant, the factory pays. And in a certain while, this production line becomes the property of the facility. This is a new business which was launched about 3 years ago, and in all spheres of automation, they're trying to implement it. But the major problem which is associated with it, and they are trying hard to solve the problem, is related to welding. This house that is associated with welding, it's very difficult to structurize. But the hyper task that we have over it, to be able to change it remotely. So we need to provide customer with a different product. We change it, we improve it. It will be a different type of a product, and the customer will not pay for a new product or for a new machine. This is just the new approach to a business model. Then, Alexei, I have a question to you. And what desire to procure a product as services depends on, and what has to be changed in your company to do it this way, or nothing has to be changed? I think this is the issue of money. If the cost of ownership of a service is less than self-service, then it's sensible. It depends on economics. I think it's not just the desire. If it's economically affected, it's okay. If it's economically not effective, then it doesn't have to be done. It's just the cost of ownership. I agree. You see, say KUKA produces robots, and this is the separation of labor. The cost of KUKA product and maintenance will be more effective in comparison if I hire a person. You started speaking about digital twins. In reality, it's all related to the changes in service and maintenance personnel and the mechanisms that we're using at the current facilities. And I would say that we have never heard objections from the directors of the facilities related to centralization, because they say that they have the experts dedicated for certain machines and not digital twins. And this is just related to the cost of ownership. And if the product TCO is cheaper, then it has to be done. If not, then it does not. It is not needed. If we're speaking about digital aspect and a transition to economy, and if it's only related to economy, we will have technologies associated with it. Only if it's economically sensible. Well, technologies are available. Just people, and people are used to it. I want to have a dedicated person to a dedicated machine. I don't want this person to be responsible for certain materials, and it's very difficult to understand why people don't want it this way. It's also very important to understand that for a truck manufacturer, it's not possible to implement such an idea because they have a strategic product, strategic materials that is risky to give to internal outsourcing. Once we deal with KAMAZ, they know that it's the cabin, the engine, and the chassis, and such things as gasoline tank. This is strategic resource that they will manufacture themselves, and they will not have any contractor for producing this. And this is not just the economically effect related. And you know, we're also speaking about such a thing related to the combination of technologies from the point of view of innovation trends. This is distributed production that is ensured with additive technologies, and we see in particular that is popular with those companies where they have territorial distributions. They will not produce a certain part in a certain location, and then with logistics they will send it to that location. But maybe they will just use 3D printing and provide this component where it is needed. I know that Skolkovo has some initiatives related to additive production, some laboratories. We've been discussing it a lot about the level of expertise of people, about their readiness to get involved. What do you think? Is the company ready to transit to 3D printing technologies, and what is needed to adopt this technology? Sergey, now the question is about additive technologies. Okay. It's about people who are ready or not. You know, when my wife and I were asked by our son for a fourth 3D printer, we started to call it deductive technologies, but not additive technologies, because more of deductive in terms of the family budget. It's just being a young generation, technologically educated generation. He's ready. He is ready for the additive technologies. And I think we are ready to support the center of innovations in one single family. Of course, the interest towards this sphere of innovations is tremendous. And what we have in Skolkovo, we have several centers of collective use. And this is where they study the experimental and industrial scale application. And so it happened that in my previous career, I had an experience when I was deeply involved in a similar type of technology. It was also technological revolution. It was not 3D revolution, but 2D revolution. This is a digital printing. If anyone was involved in this business, it was kind of a closed sphere. In the early 2000s, we had the revolution. We started to see the devices, expensive devices, but not perfect devices, which were called digital typographies. And those digital typographies for the entire market, if people know about it, if people were involved in offset printing, it was just the war of two different worlds. And those two different worlds never understood each other. They spoke different languages. And many events that are happening nowadays and many indicators that we see today in terms of implementation of digital technologies in additive production are very similar to what we had seen before. We had traditional experts in printing. They thought that if the machine was working in 2 shifts, it was okay. 3 shifts was just perfect. And the owner of the digital equipment said that ideally, if the equipment is not working, it's always readiness to get additional money and to get additional margin.
And there were a lot of views like that on a business, and it is still expensive. It is still more expensive, and it requires a high qualification in maintenance. But why have they won? Because they realize the advantages not of the digit as such, not of applying points on paper with laser or some other technologies. What they realize is that they can structure their business in a totally different way. It's not just about know your client, it's know your client's customer. And this is what they are trained in business schools. And this is well-known knowledge, which can be used in other practices and industries. But this is where the key shift takes place. If I know the needs of my customer's customer, then I am able to offer the product my customer needs. And this is where the small series products come into play, when I can earn more money. And because I've done something to maximize my customers' profit. And this is a different culture, not of just organizing of production, but organizing of business. Hence, when we say about implementation of additive technologies, quite often, maybe not always, but there's organic prototyping, which fits the current paradigm. But quite often, such technologies require a reconsideration of the marketing strategy and the production control culture. And we're coming back to digital skills, those skills which are in general in deficit now. And we are not involved in industrial technology as such, but there's big demand for development of digital technologies, educational technologies. And right now we have a pool of technologies established, and this is not a fantasy, it's not a Matrix movie, it's not a sci-fi story. There's a pool of technologies which make it possible to create a competence control technology, starting from hiring, finding people, testing them, training, measuring their level of labor productivity, adjusting it through coaching. All that is done using digital technologies, personalized tracking, individualized learning. So the cumulative of those technologies make it possible to create the entire ecosystem within the company, which will not be just connected to HR objectives, but to enhancing the level of competence in digital jobs, first of all. So I'll make this transition. The possibilities additive technologies provide to internal transformation of the company from the point of view of key culturological things, why this business is functioning, who are the customers, should we reconsider approach to marketing strategy, and naturally it is a profound review of the approach in the area of personnel competences control, because it will not happen by itself, and the universities will not generate enough qualified professionals. Well, that's an amazing thing, really, because you know, we and our children we live in different domains. There are a lot of things we don't understand because they are using such great self-learning tools. Because I did not teach my son how to work with the 3D printers, but now he knows everything about those, and he can actually teach about 3D printers in the university. He is one of the best. And he took that from open sources because he participated in open lectures, and they did some project work together. What we now see in Russia specifically is a generation thing. The young people are absolutely ready for digital technologies and education, absolutely. It's just what you're talking about is really a great subject, and I'm afraid to abuse the trust of our moderator. I'll try to say it briefly. The beauty of digital technologies is personalization. It is a possibility to provide individual approach without increasing the cost. Of course, but these are two different types of training. but I can do both. For example, I can tell about interesting projects about for mass segment for school training. Uchiru, for example, they have a million. Their audience is more than 1 million, and they are school children and parents, and they show how math is perceived by students from the same region. And it's not because somebody know math well and others don't. It's just their visuals, and it's enough to tell him once, and he would know everything. But others, they're good about text, and they have a different approach. And then, depending on their abilities, they customize the program. And depending on whether a person is strong or not in a certain position, well, that's a mistake that was done before. It's just a person has chosen a wrong profession. So this is not a panacea, of course, but digitalization can help find the right place for people in the economy, and people will be much closer to what they are predisposed to. I have much more examples, and I can say a lot. Thank you, Victor. I'm sure you want to have something to say about this subject, because I know that you are working on the university alliances, and it would be interesting to hear how it's working with the Silicon Valley, because we take a peek there from time to time. Sergey, thank you very much. And how? Well, this valley. Speaking about Silicon Valley, well, the topic is interesting. That is true. And I would like to go back to the notion of new engineers that's been mentioned. Because what we talk about, the trust, the relations between the technology and the people, it's an important aspect. We have a lot of aspects, a lot of approach and methodologies, and we say, what is the problem? About 10 years ago, maybe even more than 15 years ago, whilst working with Arbas in the university, the problem of implementation of training system for engineers that was in Great Britain, that developed A380. The problem was that from the point of view of technology, everything was great. There was online training, there was testing. However, the engineers refused working in the system. And this aspect of being ready, the readiness of engineering staff, the fact that engineers should be ready to accept information technology, these factors of paramount importance. If we talk about engineering students today in the leading universities, well, there is this Russian way of training engineers. There are traditional approach for sectoral institutions. I think on the one hand, we should preserve the base, the theoretical mathematical base we have. But at the same time, and this is where industry has a role to play, and IT, as well as IT companies, we should create new engineers. And again, we should take into account Russian realia. On the one hand, well, as a representative of SAP in Stanford and having taught in Stanford for a number of time, it's really great working with the students when you hire only 4.5% of all those who applied. That's truly a big advantage of working with leading universities. The guys who are oriented towards innovations, those who are ready to build something new without leaving the door of their home, even new 3D printers, because technologies don't stay idle. Made in Space, that launched 3D printer to International Space Station, it showed tremendous problems with 3D printing in low gravity conditions. So there are problems. And again, we shouldn't forget about mass engineering, training of engineers. We should create educational institutions in the regions, so that young guys have a chance to be part of the production chain of the companies where they have internship and where they get their knowledge. And finally, last week I was at the meeting of the 125th Jubilee Conference of the American Society of Engineering Training. That's the largest one in engineering education, and there were two keynotes there. One was from the Vice Rector of the School of Design Thinking, a leading university of the south of Europe, where he said that 100 years later, this room will be filled not with the representatives for leading universities, but their robots or avatars or even digital copies. And how it's going to develop, we don't know. What professions will still be there, and what will the room, Innoprom rooms will look like in 100 years. And after that, there was a vice president of the Association of Engineering Education of Africa who was talking, and he was talking about the problems that exist simply with engineering equipment in Nigeria and other countries. So on the one hand, avatars, that's great. On the other hand, we shouldn't forget about engineering problems, education, and connection with the industry in general. Thank you very much. Well, I guess it's too soon to talk about avatars. But in general, we've talked about innovations, and at the same time, it all boils down to the fact that if you want to ensure there are innovations, and moreover, we're talking about cross-industrial innovations, we see that what we need is the unified base of standards. If we talk about communication between people and companies, we say that we need to go back to basic notions of trust. We're not talking about high-tech things here. We're talking about things which are, in today's world, even without this high meta of innovation, they're still highly important in our everyday life. And to conclude, there should be an understanding that any innovation, no matter how cross-industrial it is, they should be supported by a clear economic model. Yes, the technologies can help us do a lot, but the fact that they're still not spread everywhere, it is due to the fact that, well, the standards are missing still. There are no sufficient economic models, and the people are not ready to accept them. The people are not ready to transition to new process structures. We as a SAP company, we're ready to provide those technologies, and we're working with the companies that are presented here during the exhibition, and we're also part of the working groups with the Ministry of Trade and other governmental organizations to ensure that the technologies are available and to ensure that this unified space of trust is there, that there is standardization. I invite you all to be part of such working groups and initiatives. If there are questions from the room, it's high time to ask them. Then let's thank our participants. Thank you very much for the dialogue.